All right, Explorer, it's just gone Halloween, the spookiest part of the year. I say we turn this into the smartest part of the year, at least the week. Let's get to it and go exploring. It's a brand new Fun Kids Science Weekly. My name is Dan. This is the only place that searches the solar system for all of that really smart science that's utterly secret. We will search, we will solve it and see what's happening. This week, I got one of your fantastic questions that you've sent in through the free Fun Kids app. And it's brilliantly random, so strangely bizarre, tiny, massive. We're learning all about how worms eat.
They've got something called a gizzard, a little way past their mouth, which grinds up the food a bit, and it goes through their intestines, where it gets digested and the nutrients get released, and it's sort of excreted at the other end.
Also, our quest to find the greatest science around, it sees us looking at more animals.
So insects are found in every single ecosystem on the planet. We have about 10 quintillion insects on the planet. About 60% of those flying insects have actually been lost in the last 10 years.
And a beast with an absolutely terrifying name slithers its way onto the Dangerous Dan list. I can't believe it's not already on there. We'll do that in a brand new Fun Kids Science Weekly. Let's start off then with your science in the news. Scientists have revealed more than a third of tree species are facing extinction in the wild. The number of threatened trees now outweighs all of the threatened birds, mammals, reptiles and amphibians put together, according to the latest update to the official Extinction Red List. Now, this news was revealed in Cumbria. World leaders are meeting there at COP16. It's the United Nations Biodiversity Summit. They meet there every now and then to talk about what they're doing to save the world. And, well, this is very important. Trees are vital for life. They literally give us the air that we breathe. No trees, no air for us. They also play an important role in soaking up carbon emissions. They give homes to so many wildlife. And we're always hearing about the threats to extinction for loads of animals. But trees too, we've completely overlooked this. I'm thankful it's been brought to our attention. This is serious business. I wonder what we can do about it. Also, a huge Maya city has been discovered centuries after it disappeared under the jungle canopy in Mexico. Archaeologists found pyramids, sports fields, districts, amphitheatres, all there. They uncovered this, which they've called Valeriana, using LiDAR, which is a type of laser survey that maps buildings buried under vegetation, and it was by accident. Luke Auld Thomas, who is a student in Tulane University over in America, was searching through Google Images, quite randomly, I think, when he found a survey done years ago by a Mexican organisation for environmental monitoring. So they'd taken this picture to kind of look at how the environment, how the jungle was getting on, but they'd missed something very important. When Luke Auld Thomas looked through this data with newer methods used by archaeologists, he saw a huge ancient city which might have been home to 50,000 people at its peak over 1,000 years ago. How incredible is it that we've discovered this over a century later, by accident? Makes you wonder what else is out there waiting that we don't know about that could utterly change everything we think we understand of the world and the universe. In our final story this week, tadpoles have decided not to turn into frogs because of this year's bad weather in the UK. The young amphibians usually begin their transition into frogs during April and May, but they've still been seen swimming in Cumbria. Let's find out why. Jodie Mills is from West Cumbria Rivers Trust and joins us. Jodie, thank you so much for joining us. When did you notice that the tadpoles were still tadpoles, that weren't frogs yet?
Well, we've been doing some lovely river restoration work. So we had a little beck that was in a concrete channel, and we've made the river all nice and wiggly again, which is better for wildlife and all the bugs and beasties that live in there. And we'd finished the river restoration, and then we saw some tadpoles. So we were very confused as to why they might be there at this time of year. Normally they come out at springtime, so I'm sure lots of people have seen frogs spawn in our ponds around, it's down south, probably end of February, and then up north, kind of more early March into March. And there's sometimes toads are normally a little bit later to lay their frog spawn than frogs are. So we're looking at probably end of April, early May. Really is the last kind of cut off for frog spawn. So to see some tadpoles in a newly restored beck in, well, end of July, early August, and then we've only just really seen, they must have laid the frog spawn then, and we've only just seen them now. So very late.
When you noticed this, what investigations did you do to try and figure out why this was happening? What questions were you asking? How on earth were you? It says that the tadpoles have decided not to turn into frogs. Well, tadpoles are tiny. It's hard to know what they're thinking, really. So, what investigations were you doing?
Well, we've been doing a bit of research actually, because the first time that we've seen it ourselves. So I've kind of seen them before in some other ponds, just a few maybe. I've got my own pond, which is a really lovely thing to have in your garden if anybody's got space for that. And really good for habitat. So my little girl, who's 10, she absolutely loves it because she goes out and she's got a little chart, and she ticks off how much the tadpoles are growing. And then of course we get lots of little baby frogs in the garden that then we have to be very careful when we're mowing that we're not mowing over. So we have to do a little sweep of the grass first. So I've seen it before in my pond where a few maybe have kept as tadpoles. In a small pond like that, they would possibly do that because there wasn't enough food over the summer months. So they decide quite early to stay as tadpoles. So if there's enough food, there's overcrowding, lots and lots of other tadpoles in there, then they'll decide not to metamorphosize. So that means that they'll decide not to start growing their legs and losing their tails and losing their gills that they breathe in with their tadpoles. But we're thinking maybe with the new river restoration that we did, so with it being so cold, and all wildlife's getting a bit confused as to whether it's summer or winter because the weather's so awful, or has been so awful over this summer. That there maybe was a couple of amorous frogs or frogs or toads that just decided to lay some frog spawn in it. So we didn't actually see the frog spawn, but because it's a new river system, they unless they've been washed down from somewhere, they've either laid the frog spawn, or they have later on, or they've washed down from somewhere else. But there's not really anything upstream where they could have washed down from. So it's all a bit of a mystery, very exciting.
Yeah, and I'm really amazed by this idea that the tadpoles decide to turn into frogs. How much do you know about that? Is it like a thoughtful choice? One day they're like, right, that's me. It's time for me to be a frog. Is it something that's happening deep down in their chemistry that they need to wait for the right temperatures? And what's happening there? Yeah,
absolutely. So the temperature will affect that. So as we did, everybody knows we had a bit of a rotten summer. So it was quite cold. So they may have decided to stay as tadpoles. And as I say, if there's a lot of competition for food and they can't get enough food to grow, they obviously need quite a lot of energy to metamorphosize. So so they decide quite early on to stay as tadpoles. So they can survive over the winter as tadpoles, and apparently can also withstand being frozen for a short while, which is also quite fascinating. Isn't wildlife just incredible?
Yeah, let's hope it doesn't get to freezing just yet. So this is, many people will say that this is our terrible spring and summer is due to the climate crisis. What preparations do you have to do in the West Cumbria Rivers Trust, thinking to the future and how our seasons and our climate will be changing?
Yeah, well, we're already doing a lot of work around that. So one of the issues we have as well is that the rivers, when it is a nice summer, are getting hotter. We've got droughts, we've got floods. So all of these phenomenons happening much more frequently, but also with greater ferocity as well. I mean, last year, we would all the tadpoles died because all the becks and the ponds and things were drying up because we had that really hot summer. So we're trying to do more river restoration, so putting rivers back where they're supposed to be. A lot of them have been straightened and canalised to get water off the land as quickly as possible. So they're not in their nice, natural, wiggly state that rivers should be in. So we're doing a lot of work around that to make rivers more resilient. Also, some tree planting along the rivers as well to help shade them so that they're not warming up. We have lots of species that obviously are very not very resilient to temperature changes in the water. Some of our fish species, particularly salmon, don't like those extremes in temperature and will really, really suffer.
Thank you very much, Jodie, for coming on the show, telling us all about tadpoles. I can't believe they make a decision pretty much to turn into frogs. You thought it just kind of happened, didn't you? Brilliant. We'll have more science in the news next week for you. Got another expert in this sec answering one of your questions. If you have anything sciencey that you want answered on this show, make sure you leave it as a voice note for me on the free Fun Kids app. You can do it at funkidslive.com too. And it can be about anything at all. If I can't find out the answer, I'll do the digging. I will get a proper genius to explain it all for you. First up this week, it's from Rory, who is 10 years old from the UK, wants to know, why do we get pins and needles? Why are they called pins and needles? We call that feeling of numbness when your arm and your leg goes numb, and then when you try to move it again, it tingles, doesn't it? It kind of stings, it hurts. We call that pins and needles. Its proper name is temporary paresthesia. And experts think what's happening is when you put too much pressure on an arm or your leg, you pinch the nerve and the blood vessels that are inside it. Nerves carry information to your brain. When you release that pressure, the blood rushes back to the nerves, which powers them up, and then they start firing information to your brain. So you get a flood, you get a rush of feelings heading to your brain, and it makes it very intense. It kind of overstimulates it for a little bit with all of these feelings that it's not had suddenly arriving. Your brain doesn't know what to do with it, so that's why it feels very tingly, very much like pins and like needles. Rory, thank you so much for the question. Let's get on another one then. This is from Romi. What do you have, Romi?
How can worms eat if they don't have a mouth?
Well, Romi, thank you very much for your question. How do worms eat without a mouth? Let's sort that out. It's something I've never thought of. I'm delighted that you have given us the chance to figure this one out, Romi. We're with Professor Mark Hodson from the University of York. Mark, thank you for joining us. How do worms eat without a mouth?
Well, I guess the first thing to say is they do have a mouth. So from that perspective, it's relatively straightforward. So you can think of earthworms as essentially being quite long tubes. They've got a mouth at one end. They've got their little bottom at the other end. They open their mouths. Food goes in one end. It goes through their body. They've got something called a gizzard, a little way past their mouth, which grinds up the food a bit. And it goes through their intestines, where it gets digested and the nutrients get released. And it's sort of excreted at the other end. Sometimes, well, they form things called earthworm casts, little sort of balls and bobbles of soil. Sometimes you'll see them on the surface of the soil. So if you're in a grassy field, for example, you might see little balls of soil on top of the surface. That's earthworm poo. It's come out of an earthworm. But some earthworms do that in the ground as well. So the soil underneath your feet is also full of earthworm poo.
Why do you think Romi is thinking worms do not have a mouth? Is that a common misapprehension?
Yeah, I mean, when you're an academic, when you're a professor, you get very, very specialised in definite things. And I'm an earthworm specialist. So I definitely know about earthworms. There are other types of worm as well, and generally they do have mouths too. So I think it's as I say, I'm not a sort of general biologist. I'm an earthworm specialist, but generally I think worms do have mouths. Obviously, they don't. The earthworms, thankfully, they don't have teeth or anything like that. So they're not going to sort of grab onto your finger if you're poking around in the dirt. So they open their mouth. In part, they sort of slightly suck the food in, and they sort of pull it into their mouths, and then the sort of contractions of their muscles help it move down their body.
So just a few more questions on general earthworms then. Normally, we can see the point in most creatures when we have annoying wasps or strange insects. We know that they're doing a lot for general ecology and for the environment, stuff that we need but don't necessarily see. What's the point in an earthworm? What's it doing?
Well, they're actually incredibly useful animals. So Charles Darwin who wrote The Origin of the Species and did all that work on evolution. Actually, his last book, published in 1881, I think it was a big bestseller, all about earthworms. And so, actually, and even before then, there was a famous ecologist called, I'm going to get his name wrong now, Gilbert, that's right, about 100 years before Darwin. Again, he also knew lots of stuff about earthworms. So they do a whole bunch of things. Some of the stuff they do is because they ingest a lot of sort of plant leaves, that material, they break down that dead plant material and re-release the nutrients into soils. So actually, there have been studies done that show that plants, the growth rate of plants is increased by up to about 24% in the presence of earthworms. So earthworms help plants grow. That's one thing they do. Their burrows through the soil, that can help water be transmitted through soil and help soils store water. So actually they reduce flooding as well. And another thing they do, that earthworm poo that comes out the back end of an earthworm after they've eaten stuff, that actually helps wrap up some of that organic matter so it doesn't decay, and that helps store carbon in soils. So earthworms do a whole bunch of stuff, which is really helpful both to the environment in general and to humans.
And you said that you specialised in earthworms. Why, of all the animals out there, what drew you to be inspired to spend your life studying earthworms?
I don't know. It must be something in my childhood. They're fascinating creatures. They're really interesting. So if you want to study animals in the soil, in terms of soil organisms, although in a teaspoonful of soil you might have like 1 billion bacteria, so you'll have more of them. But if you took a sort of block of soil, the biggest mass of animals, which is one way of measuring their importance, would be earthworms. So they're very important in soils. And actually, there's all sorts of things that people don't know about them. So, you can sort of ask, the questions you get asked sometimes, like, well, how long does an earthworm live? And I can tell you that in the lab, some people have kept earthworms their favourite pet earthworm for several years. But, outside in the real world, that's a difficult question to answer. There are all sorts of things about earthworm behaviour that we don't fully understand. How quickly do they move from one side of a field to another? We don't know. So there's all sorts of interesting experiments you can do. And of course, it's great when you're working on earthworms to be able to talk about famous scientists like Darwin as well, that lots of people have heard of. And so you can think about the observations that Darwin made and the experiments he did. You used to sort of creep up behind them and play the bassoon to see whether they could hear instruments and things like that. And you can actually do lots of similar experiments yourself. They don't necessarily need to be overly technical or difficult to do, and find out lots of interesting information that people don't yet know about earthworms. So they're a really important animal. They're easy to see and collect. So it's not like working with bacteria when you can't see the things. And they're just a fun organism. We've all come across earthworms and seen them sort of crawling across pavements when it's raining and things like that. It's just great learning more about them.
Well, there you go, Romi. That's answering all about how worms eat and loads more earthworms questions besides. Professor Mark Hodson, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
What a brilliant question, eh? How do worms eat without a mouth? I love those really random ones. If you have anything that you want answered, make it as strange and sillily sciencey as you can. Send over to the Free Fun Kids app and at funkidslive.com. Because the ones that sound a bit odd are actually where brilliant facts and things you would never think of, that's where they all live. So thank you very much, Romi. Make sure you send yours as a voice note to the Free Fun Kids app or at funkidslive.com. And let's get on with this week's Danger Stand then, where we are talking about a snake with possibly the most terrifying name ever. I can't believe it's not on our list already. For it, we need to head to the home of dangerous beasts, really, Australia, to take a look at the Death Adder. The Death Adder! What a brilliantly named. Just get it on the Danger Stand list anyway. Do we need to hear about it? Oh, we'll take a little gander. But the Death Adder, it's native in Australia and New Guinea as well. They're quite a short, stout beast with a thick body and a triangular head. Normally with bands of grey, brown and red across the body, letting them perfectly blend in and camouflage, and they need to do that. They are ambush predators. My favourite type of beasts. They don't go out and attack. They're usually quite chilled, but if you get in their way, if you anger them, they will come after you. The Death Adder lies in wait. blends in, and then strikes incredibly quickly. They've got a highly toxic venom. One bite can cause paralysis, difficulty breathing, muscle weakness, almost complete respiratory failure. That's kind of your breathing organs, your lungs, your heart. So if you can't breathe, that's quite bad for you. They look mean. They are big, they are beastly, they've got this terrifyingly toxic venom and a horrendously scary name too. And that is why the Death Adder finally goes straight on our Dangerous Dan list. This week on Battle of the Sciences, where we strive to discover the greatest science in the history of the universe, we are with Dr. Alex Dittrich from Nottingham Trent University, where it's all about ecological monitoring, which sounds incredibly unique. Let's unpack it. Alex, you have 1 minute to tell us why ecological monitoring is the greatest science in the world. That minute starts in 3, 2, 1, go!
So, yes, ecological monitoring, very, very important because we need to understand how healthy the planet is. And the best way to tell how healthy a planet is by looking at all the wonderful animals and plants that we have on the planet, and use the information that we get from these animals and these plants to tell us how healthy the world is. So, as you probably know, humans are just one of thousands upon thousands of species that we have on this planet. And by understanding how those other animals are interacting with each other, how they're working within their own little ecosystems, it gives us a really good picture of how healthy that planet is. And one of the things that we've found out recently is that a lot of animals are really suffering. They're really suffering at the hands of us humans, and by studying them and monitoring them and looking at these populations.
And that's your minute, Alex.
Oh,
I know, and I feel so mean.
That's all right. It's okay. It's the rules.
While you were telling us about the brutal hardship that many creatures are having to go through at the hands of us humans. But we can unpack that now. So, Alex, when you get into work every day as an ecological monitoring scientist, I know that there is so much that comes under that. What are you doing? What are you looking at? How are you understanding the creatures around us a bit better?
So there's two things that I do in my day job, right? In my day job, I am a researcher and I am a university lecturer. So my job involves setting up kind of research projects and working on kind of long-term research projects that look at changes in animal communities in loads of different ecosystems. That could be like urban, or it can be very remote habitats. So like I work up in the Highlands of Scotland on some projects, as well as, working in some cities. But then the other part of my job is telling those students at university about what I do and teaching them those skills that I apply in my day-to-day kind of research role.
You mentioned those research projects and the more long-term ones that you're doing, which must be interesting because our understanding of animals and humans' role in the growth and the spread and maybe the deterioration of animals is always changing. Tell us about a really exciting project that you've worked on over a long term recently.
Oh, okay. So a number of projects that I've worked on recently. So I worked on a project in the north of England where we looked at how we could change a golf course, right? Golf courses aren't known for their biodiversity. They're not known for the numbers of species that you find on them, into a nature reserve. So we got an old golf course, and that golf course was no longer being used as one, but we used the land that was there and we turned it into a nature reserve. And my role was coordinating some monitoring there. So we did some really interesting monitoring on that golf course to kind of work out what kind of really interesting insects and other species went to that site after we did our work on it.
The thing with insects is they do freak a lot of people out just by the slightly alien way that they look. Now, you're across all the insects, but what's one that could still give you the creeps if you were digging your hand through soil and this strange thing appeared? What would really freak you out?
I have to be honest, Nothing. And I'm going to say that. I'm going to put my foot down, and I say I am amazed by everything that we have on this planet. There's not an animal out there that doesn't deserve its place in the world that I'm not fascinated by, and I refuse to be scared, and I will remain fascinated by every living creature on this planet. That said, there are a few things that I find very, very unusual and almost alien and fascinating in that weirdness. Now, there are two things that I will urge your readers to potentially look for, maybe have a little read up about. One of them is tailless whip scorpions, which I find absolutely fascinating. They're very, very strange. And another one is a thing known as a sun spider, which is a solifugid. Okay, if you look up the scientific name for that. So two very fascinating, wonderful creatures that I have actually encountered in the wild, not in the UK, but definitely worth a look.
I've looked up the tailless whip scorpion, and it does look like something that they magic up in one of the Harry Potter films and get levitating.
I actually do believe that one of them was used in one of the Harry Potter movies, yes.
I thought it looked familiar. This is my last question, Alex. Let me throw you forward some years. I don't know, 10, 20, 30, whenever it is that you call time on your career proper as a scientist. What's the one question you want answered? What's the one discovery, the one solution that you really want to find?
I would like to see the rate of extinction that we're seeing on this planet, the rate that species are going extinct, and once a species is extinct, it's not coming back, to be slowed down to a near complete stop. I want to see a solution to that. And that could be a solution in changing people's attitudes so that they appreciate more of the natural world. But it could also be how we use the environment, how we work within our environment to make it a better place for not just humans, but for all the other animals that we share with it.
What animal is perilously close to being extinct that you are particularly worried about?
So insects are found in every single ecosystem on the planet. You find insects everywhere. We have about 10 quintillion insects on the planet, which is an awfully big number. You can work out how many zeros that is. That's quite a lot of zeros. That's billions upon billions upon billions. It's a big, big number. And there is some evidence to suggest that about 60% of those flying insects have actually been lost in the last 10 years. So the average listenership age of your podcast here, so we're talking 10-year-olds. So in your lifetime, potentially, certainly in the UK, we've lost 60% of these animals. And an enormous proportion of these as well are like whole species that are kind of threatened with extinction. It's scary. It's really scary.
Well, not just a fight for ecological monitoring and its place in the battle of the sciences, but a fight for the future of many species. Dr. Alex Dittrich, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Loved chatting to Alex, all about aquatic zoology and animal sciences and why that should be the greatest science in the history of the universe. What do you think? We'll get another contestant battling it out next week on the show. We can hear a bit more about what's happening in water under the ocean right now with Marina Ventura, one of our favourite geniuses on the show. She's back. It's another episode of her Ocean Adventure series, joined by her trusty sidekick, Map App. They're going on this journey across the seas to find out what's lying deep down under the ocean.
Marina Ventura's Ocean Adventure, supported by the Natural Environment Research Council, the science of the natural world.
Welcome back to my Ocean Adventure. Today we're looking at just a few of the amazing animals that make a home in the ocean. But as they can't come to us, let's take a dive in the submarine and pay them a visit. Closing the hatch. And down she goes. Whee! Submarines make it easy to power down to the bottom of the sea. But if you've ever tried to pick something off the bottom of the swimming pool, you'll know it can be tough to push downwards against the water. It's the same for fish. Amazing! Through the periscope, we can see some clever copepods. They're so tiny that without a trick up their sleeves, they'd just float away. Luckily, the water pressure triggers a reaction in the copepod's oily body fluids that makes them more solid. This increases their density and helps them stay in the deep water. Simple. Wow, it's a hydrothermal vent. Let's not get too close, though. Boiling water shooting through the freezing depths would fry us in an instant. But astonishingly, they're teeming with sea life. Mussels, which are a type of shellfish, are just one life form that lives happily here, coping with both hot and cold water. Scientists have only scratched the surface of the amazing varieties of life down in our oceans. New species are found all the time, like the long and lean Jameson shrimp, named after the British scientist who discovered it in 2008. And even species we know about already, like krill, are being discovered hanging out in deep waters in such large numbers, which means there may be many more fish in the sea than we thought. Let's find out some more cool stuff with Map app, if I can find it in my bag. That's not it. I thought I'd packed it near the top. Nope, that's my umbrella. The last thing I need in a submarine, unless we spring a leak. Oh, here it is.
Hello. Gosh, it's dark in here.
We're underwater today in the submarine. Have you got any cool facts about some of the savvy, smaller animals in our oceans?
I have the perfect fact for you about a very cheeky crab. Christmas Island red crabs must be the envy of many a runner. They can go from virtual couch potato to multiple marathon athletes with almost no training. For a few weeks during the wet season in November and December, the roads of Christmas Island, a small island in the Indian Ocean just south of Indonesia, are carpeted with red when the crabs take off on their annual migration from the rainforest to the coast to find mates. But for most of the year, they hardly move, only coming out of their burrows at dawn to feed.
Well, it's time for me to have a rest too. Join me and Map app next time when we'll be investigating more marvellous marine life in our ocean adventure. Doodle pip for now.
Marina Ventura's Ocean Adventure, a Fun Kids production in association with the Natural Environment Research Council, the science of the natural world.
That's Marina Ventura. She finishes off the Fun Kids Science Weekly this week. You've got loads more from her wherever you listen to your podcasts, and tons more brilliant shows there too. Google, Apple, Spotify, the free Fun Kids app, so many places like that. If you've got a question, make sure you leave it as a voice note for me on the free Fun Kids app or at funkidslive.com. And Fun Kids, we are a children's radio station in the UK. Listen on the app, on our website, funkidslive.com. And if you've got a smart speaker, make sure you wake it up and ask it to play Fun Kids. That is Marina Ventura. She finishes off this week's episode of the Fun Kids Science Weekly. Thank you for listening. Thank you for exploring with me. I will see you same time next week with a brand new adventure around the universe.